One Last Time, Gary Soto. Yesterday, I saw the movie Gandhi and recognized a few of the people, not in the theater, but in the film. I saw my relatives, dusty and thin as sparrows, returning from the fields with hoes balanced on their shoulders. The workers were squinting, eyes small and veined, and were using their hands to say what there was to say to those in the audience with popcorn. I didn't have any, though. I sat thinking of my family and their years in the fields, beginning with grandmother, who came to the United States after the Mexican Revolution to settle in Fresno, where she met her husband and bore children, many of them. She worked in the fields around Fresno, picking grapes, oranges, plums, peaches, and cotton, dragging a large white sack like a sled. She worked in the packing houses, Bonner and Sun-Made Raisin, where she stood at a conveyor belt, passing her hand over streams of raisins to pluck out leaves and pebbles. For over 20 years, she worked at a machine that boxed raisins until she retired at 65. Grandfather worked in the fields, as did his children. Mother also found herself out there when she separated from father for 3 weeks. I remember her coming home, dusty and so tired that she had to rest on the porch before she trudged inside to wash and start dinner. I didn't understand the complaints about her ankles or the small of her back, even though I had been in the grape fields watching her work. With my brother and sister, I ran in and out of the rows. We enjoyed ourselves and pretended not to hear Mother scolding us to sit down and behave ourselves. A few years later, however, I caught on when I went to pick grapes rather than play in the rows. Mother and I got up before dawn and ate quick bowls of cereal. She drove in silence while I rambled on how everything was now solved, how I was going to make enough money to end our misery and even buy her a beautiful copper teapot, the one I had shown her in Long's Drugs. When we arrived, I was frisky and ready to go, self-consciously aware of my grape knife dangling at my wrist. I almost ran to the row the foreman had pointed out, but I returned to help Mother with the grape pans and jug of water. She told me to settle down and reminded me not to lose my knife. I walked at her side and listened to her explain how to cut grapes. Bent down, hands on knees, I watched her demonstrate by cutting a few bunches into my pan. She stood over me as I tried it myself, tugging at a bunch of grapes that pulled loose like beads from a necklace. "Cut the stem all the way," she told me as last advice before she walked away, her shoes sinking in the loose dirt to begin work on her own row. I cut another bunch, then another, fighting the snap and whip of vines. After 10 minutes of groping for grapes, my first pan brimmed with bunches. I poured them on the paper tray, which was bordered by a wooden frame that kept the grapes from rolling off, and they spilled like jewels from a pirate's chest. The tray was only half filled, so I hurried to jump under the vines and begin groping, cutting, and tugging at the grapes again. I emptied the pan, raked the grapes with my hands to make them look like they filled the tray, and jumped back under the vine on my knees. I tried to cut faster because Mother, in the next row, was slowly moving ahead. I peeked into her row and saw 5 trays gleaming in the early morning. I cut, pulled hard, and stopped to gather the grapes that missed the pan. Already bored, I spat on a few to wash them before tossing them like popcorn into my mouth. So it went. 2 pans equaled 1 tray, or 6 cents. By lunchtime, I had a trail of 37 trays behind me, while Mother had 60 or more. We met about halfway from our last trays, and I sat down with a grunt, knees wet from kneeling on dropped grapes. I washed my hands with the water from the jug, drying them on the inside of my shirt sleeve, before I opened the paper bag for the first sandwich, which I gave to Mother. I dipped my hand in again to unwrap a sandwich without looking at it. I took a first bite and chewed it slowly for the tang of mustard. Eating in silence, I looked straight ahead at the vines, and only when we were finished with cookies did we talk. "Are you tired?" she asked. "No, but I got a sliver from the frame," I told her. I showed her the web of skin between my thumb and index finger. She wrinkled her forehead, but said it was nothing. "How many trays did you do?" I looked straight ahead, not answering at first. I recounted in my mind the whole morning of bend, cut, pour again, and again, before answering a feeble 37. No elaboration, no detail. Without looking at me, she told me how she had done field work in Texas and Michigan as a child, but I had a difficult time listening to her stories. I played with my grape knife, stabbing it into the ground, but stopped when Mother reminded me that I had better not lose it. I left the knife sticking up like a small leafless plant. She then talked about school, the junior high I would be going to that fall, and then about Rick and Deborah, how sorry they would be that they hadn't come out to pick grapes because they'd have no new clothes for the school year. She stopped talking when she peeked at her watch, a bandless one she kept in her pocket. She got up with an "Ay Dios," and told me that we'd work until 3, leaving me cutting figures in the sand with my knife and dreading the return to work. Finally, I rose and walked slowly back to where I had left off, again kneeling under the vine and fixing the pan under bunches of grapes. By that time, 11:30, the sun was over my shoulder and made me squint and think of the pool at the YMCA where I was a summer member. I saw myself diving face first into the water and loving it. I saw myself gleaming like something new at the edge of the pool. I had to daydream and keep my mind busy because boredom was a terror almost as awful as the work itself. My mind went dumb with stupid things, and I had to keep it moving with dreams of baseball and would-be girlfriends. I even sang, however softly, to keep my mind moving, my hands moving. I worked less hurriedly and with less vision. I no longer saw that copper pot sitting squat on our stove, or Mother waiting for it to whistle. The wardrobe that I imagined, crisp and bright in the closet, numbered only 1 pair of jeans and 2 shirts, because in half a day, 6 cents times 37 trays was $2.22. It became clear to me, if I worked 8 hours, I might make $4. I'd take this, even gladly, and walk downtown to look into store windows on the mall and long for the bright Madras shirt from Walter Smith or Coffee's, but settling for 2 imitation ones from Penny's. That first day I laid down 73 trays, while Mother had 120 behind her. On the back of an old envelope, she wrote out our numbers and hours. We washed at the pump behind the farmhouse, and walked slowly to our car for the drive back to town in the afternoon heat. That evening, after dinner, I sat in a lawn chair listening to music from a transistor radio, while Rick and David King played catch. I joined them in a game of pickle, but there was little joy in trying to avoid their tags, because I couldn't get the fields out of my mind. I saw myself dropping on my knees under a vine to tug at a branch that wouldn't come off. In bed, when I closed my eyes, I saw the fields, yellow with kicked-up dust and a crooked trail of trays rotting behind me. The next day, I woke tired and started picking tired. The grapes rained into the pan, slowly filling like a belly until I had my first tray and started my second. So it went all day, and the next, and all through the following week, so that by the end of 13 days, the foreman counted out, in tens mostly, my pay of $53. Mother earned $148. She wrote this on her envelope, with a message I didn't bother to ask her about. The next day, I walked with my friend Scott to the downtown mall where we drooled over the clothes behind fancy windows, bought popcorn, and sat at a tier of outdoor fountains to talk about girls. Finally, we went into Penny's for more popcorn, which we ate walking around before we returned home without buying anything. It wasn't until a few days before school that I let my $53 slip quietly from my hands, buying a pair of pants, 2 shirts, and a maroon t-shirt, the kind that was in style. At home, I tried them on, while Rick looked on enviously. Later, the day before school started, I tried them on again, wondering not so much if they were worth it as who would see me first in those clothes. Along with my brother and sister, I picked grapes until I was 15, before giving up and saying that I'd rather wear old clothes than stoop like a Mexican. Mother thought I was being stuck up, even stupid, because there would be no clothes for me in the fall. I told her I didn't care. But when Rick and Deborah rose at 5 in the morning, I lay awake in bed, feeling that perhaps I had made a mistake, but unwilling to change my mind. That fall, Mother bought me 2 pairs of socks, a packet of colored t-shirts, and underwear. The t-shirts would help, I thought, but who would see that I had new underwear and socks? I wore a new t-shirt on the first day of school, then an old shirt on Tuesday, then another t-shirt on Wednesday, and on Thursday an old Nehru shirt that was embarrassingly out of style. On Friday, I changed into the corduroy pants my brother had handed down to me and slipped into my last new t-shirt. I worked like a magician, blinding my classmates, who were all clothes-conscious and small-time social climbers, by arranging my wardrobe to make it seem larger than it really was. But by spring, I had to do something. My blue jeans were almost silver, and my shoes had lost their form, puddling like black ice around my feet. That spring of my 16th year, Rick and I decided to take a labor bus to chop cotton. In his old Volkswagen, which was more noise than power, we drove on a Saturday morning to West Fresno, or Chinatown, as some call it, parked, walked slowly toward a bus, and stood gawking at the blacks, Okies, Tejanos with gold teeth, Mexican families, and labor contractors shouting, "Cotton," or "Beets," the work of spring. We boarded the cotton bus without looking at the contractor, who stood almost blocking the entrance. We boarded scared. We sat, looking straight ahead, and only glanced briefly at the others who boarded, almost all of them broken and poorly dressed in loudly mismatched clothes. Finally, when the contractor banged his palm against the side of the bus, the young man at the wheel, smiling and talking in Spanish, started the engine, idled it for a moment while he adjusted the mirrors, and started off in slow chugs. Except for the windshield, there was no glass in the windows, so as soon as we were on the rural roads outside Fresno, the dust and sand began to be sucked into the bus, whipping about like irate wasps as the gravel ticked about us. We closed our eyes, clotted up our mouths that wanted to open with embarrassed laughter because we couldn't believe we were on that bus with those people and the dust attacking us for no reason. When we arrived at a field, we followed the others to a pickup where we each took a hoe and marched to stand before a row. Rick and I, self-conscious and unsure, looked around at the others who leaned on their hoes or squatted in front of the rows, almost all talking in Spanish, joking, all waiting for the foreman's whistle to begin work. Mother had explained how to chop cotton by showing us with a broom in the backyard. "Like this," she said, her broom swishing down weeds. "Leave 1 plant and cut 4, and cut them. Don't leave them standing or the foreman will get mad." The foreman whistled, and we started up the row, stealing glances at other workers to see if we were doing it right. But after a while, we worked like we knew what we were doing, neither of us hurrying or falling behind. But slowly, the clot of men, women, and kids began to spread and loosen. Even Rick pulled away. I didn't hurry, though. I cut smoothly and cleanly as I walked at a slow pace in a sort of funeral march. My eyes measured each space of cotton plants before I cut. If I missed the plants, I swished again. I worked intently, seldom looking up, so when I did, I was amazed to see the sun like a broken orange coin in the east. It looked blurry, unbelievable, like something not of this world. I looked around in amazement. Scanning the eastern horizon, there was a taut line jutted with an occasional mountain. The horizon was beautiful, like a snapshot of the moon in the early light of morning, in the quiet of no cars and few people. The foreman trudged in boots in my direction, stepping awkwardly over the plants to inspect the work. No one around me looked up. We all worked steadily while we waited for him to leave. When he did leave, with a feeble complaint addressed to no one in particular, we looked up, smiling under straw hats and bandanas. By 11 o'clock, our lunchtime, my ankles were hurting from walking on clods the size of hardballs. My arms ached, and my face was dusted by a wind that was perpetual, always busy whipping about. But the work was not bad, I thought. It was better, so much better, than picking grapes, especially with the hourly wage of $1.25 instead of piecework. Rick and I walked sorely toward the bus, where we washed and drank water. Instead of eating in the bus or in the shade of the bus, we kept to ourselves by walking down to the irrigation canal that ran the length of the field to open our lunch of sandwiches and crackers. We laughed at the crackers, which seemed like a cruel joke from our mother, because we were working under the sun, and the last thing we wanted was a salty dessert. We ate them anyway, and drank more water before we returned to the field, both of us limping in exaggeration. Working side by side, we talked and laughed at our predicament, because our mother had warned us year after year that if we didn't get on track in school, we'd have to work in the fields, and then we would see. We mimicked Mother's whining voice and smirked at her smoky view of the future, in which we'd be trapped by marriage and screaming kids. We'd eat beans, and then we'd see. Rick pulled slowly away to the rhythm of his hoe falling faster and smoother. It was better that way, to work alone. I could hum made-up songs or songs from the radio and think to myself about school and friends. At the time, I was doing badly in my classes, mainly because of a difficult stepfather, but also because I didn't care anymore. All through junior high and into my first year of high school, there were those who said I would never do anything, be anyone. They said I'd work like a donkey and marry the first Mexican girl that came along. I was reminded so often verbally and in the way I was treated at home that I began to believe that chopping cotton might be a lifetime job for me. If not chopping cotton, then I might get lucky and find myself in a car wash or restaurant or junkyard. But it was clear. I'd work, and work hard. I cleared my mind by humming and looking about. The sun was directly above with a few soft blades of clouds against a sky that seemed bluer and more beautiful than our sky in the city. Occasionally, the breeze flurried and picked up dust so that I had to cover my eyes and screw up my face. The workers were hunched, brown as the clods under our feet, and spread across the field that ran without end, fields that were owned by corporations, not families. I hoed, trying to keep my mind busy with scenes from school and pretend girlfriends, until finally my brain turned off and my thinking went fuzzy with boredom. I looked about, no longer mesmerized by the beauty of the landscape, no longer dreaming of the clothes I'd buy with my pay. My eyes followed my chopping as the plants, thin as their shadows, fell with each strike. I worked slowly, with ankles and arms hurting, neck stiff, and eyes stinging from the dust and the sun that glanced off the field like a mirror. By quitting time, 3 o'clock, there was such an excruciating pain in my ankles that I walked as if I were wearing snowshoes. Rick laughed at me, and I laughed too, embarrassed that most of the men were walking normally, and I was among the first-timers who had to get used to this work. "And what about you?" I came back at Rick. His eyes were meshed red, and his long hippie hair was flecked with dust and gnats and bits of leaves. We placed our hose in the back of a pickup and stood in line for our pay, which was $12.50. I was amazed at the pay, which was the most I had ever earned in one day, and thought that I'd come back the next day, Sunday. This was too good. Instead of joining the others in the labor bus, we jumped in the back of a pickup when the driver said we'd get to town sooner and were welcome to join him. We scrambled into the truck bed to be joined by a heavy-set and laughing Tejano, whose head was shaped like an egg, particularly so because the bandana he wore ended in a point on the top of his head. He laughed almost demonically as the pickup roared up the dirt path, a gray cape of dust rising behind us. On the highway, with the wind in our faces, we squinted at the fields as if we were looking for someone. The Tejano had quit laughing, but was smiling broadly, occasionally chortling tunes he never finished. I was scared of him, though Rick, 2 years older and 5 inches taller, wasn't. If the Tejano looked at him, Rick stared back for a second or two before he looked away to the fields. I felt like a soldier coming home from war when we rattled into Chinatown. People leaning against car hoods stared, their necks following us, owl-like. Chinese grocers stopped brooming their storefronts to raise their cadaverous faces at us. We stopped in front of the Chi-Chi Club, where Mexican music blared from the jukebox, and cue balls cracked like dull ice. The Tejano, who was dirty as we were, stepped awkwardly over the side rail, dusted himself off with his bandana, and sauntered into the club. Rick and I jumped from the back, thanked the driver, who said de nada, and popped his clutch so that the pickup jerked and coughed blue smoke. We returned smiling to our car, happy with the money we had made, and pleased that we had, in a small way, proved ourselves to be tough, that we worked as well as other men and earned the same pay. We returned the next day, and the next week, until the season was over and there was nothing to do. I told myself that I wouldn't pick grapes that summer, saying all through June and July that it was for Mexicans, not me. When August came around and I still had not found a summer job, I ate my words, sharpened my knife, and joined Mother, Rick, and Deborah for one last time.